When Maya walked out after 10 days, she went straight to pick up her 4-year-old daughter. Her daughter wasn't there. She was in a stranger's house. And her sister was on a plane to Texas. The thing about rock bottom is that nobody believes they've reached it until they're already there, sitting in it, breathing it, wearing it like a second skin they never asked for. Maya Reeves knew rock bottom intimately. She had visited it before, at 23 when she lost her first pregnancy, at 26 when her marriage dissolved like sugar in rain, at 28 when the drinking stopped being a habit and became a heartbeat. She had climbed out of it each time with bleeding fingernails and borrowed courage, and each time she had told herself, never again. Not this low. Not this far down. But this, sitting in the back of a county transport vehicle at 31 years old, wrists resting in her lap, watching the city she had grown up in scroll past tinted windows like a film she was no longer allowed to star in, this was a different kind of bottom. This one had a floor she hadn't known existed. What made it different wasn't the handcuffs. It wasn't the mandatory 10-day sentence for a second DUI that she couldn't afford to fight and was too exhausted to contest. It wasn't even the shame, though the shame was oceanic, vast and cold and seemingly without end. What made this bottom different was the face she kept seeing every time she closed her eyes. Chloe, 4 years old. Brown pigtails. A gap between her 2 front teeth that had appeared 3 weeks ago and that Chloe kept running her tongue across with an expression of pure scientific fascination. The face of the one person on this earth that Maya had gotten completely right, in a life where she had gotten so many things completely, catastrophically wrong. She had kissed that face at 6 a.m. before the transport came. Had held it in both hands and pressed her lips to the small warm forehead and whispered things she hoped would root themselves somewhere deep enough to last 10 days. Mommy loves you more than all the water in all the oceans. Mommy will be back before you even miss her. You are safe. You are so loved. You are everything. Chloe had looked up at her with those serious dark eyes and said, with the devastating simplicity of a 4-year-old, "Okay, Mommy. Auntie Sarah makes good pancakes." Maya had laughed. The laugh had cracked somewhere in the middle and she turned away before it became something else. She had done one thing right before she surrendered herself. One careful, deliberate, love-soaked thing. She had put her daughter in the hands of her sister. She had no idea that decision was about to become the deepest wound of her life. To understand Maya Reeves, you had to understand what the last 3 years had taken from her. Not taken gently, the way time takes things, gradually, softly, so that the loss registers only in retrospect. Taken violently. Taken in the specific way that life sometimes turns on a person and delivers blow after blow in such rapid succession that the body stops flinching because there is simply no longer the energy for it. It had started with her mother. Eleanor Reeves had been the kind of woman who made every room she entered feel smaller and warmer at the same time. A woman of immovable faith and enormous laughter and the particular gift of making her children feel that the world was manageable, even when it clearly was not. She had raised Maya and Sarah alone after their father left when Maya was 7 and Sarah was 10, had worked double shifts at a hospital laundry facility for years, and had never, not once, not even in the hardest moments, made her daughters feel like burdens. Eleanor died of a stroke on a Wednesday morning in October, alone in her apartment, a cup of tea still steaming on the kitchen counter when Maya found her 3 hours later. Maya had walked into that apartment to bring her mother groceries and walked out a person who no longer recognized the architecture of her own world. She drank that night. Not unusually, Maya had always been what people politely called a social drinker, which was a comfortable way of not examining how much social she needed. But that night she drank until the grief had somewhere to go, and then she kept drinking until it came back, and then she drank some more. 6 weeks after her mother's funeral, she was assaulted. She had been walking from a parking lot to a restaurant where she was meeting a friend, a distance of less than half a block, at 7 p.m., in a neighborhood she had walked through 100 times. She never saw his face clearly. She never reported it. She told herself for a long time that this was because she was protecting herself from a process she didn't have the strength for, and this was partially true. The fuller truth was that she didn't report it because some damaged part of her brain, soaked in grief and alcohol, whispered that she had somehow authored it. That broken people attract broken things. She knew, in the clear daylight of her sober mind, that this was not true. But grief and alcohol do not operate in clear daylight. What followed was a year she could only account for in fragments. There were good months when she held it together, went to work, took care of Chloe, called Sarah on Sundays. Months when she convinced herself she was fine. And then there were the other months, which swallowed the good ones whole. Chloe's father, Marcus, had been out of the picture since Chloe was 18 months old, not dramatically, not with a great falling out, but with the slow withdrawal of a man who had realized fatherhood required more than he was willing to give. He paid child support inconsistently. He called on birthdays sometimes. He was not cruel. He was simply absent in the way that some people are absent, physically present on occasion, but fundamentally elsewhere. So it was Maya alone. Maya and Chloe, and the particular fierce tenderness of a mother who knew she was imperfect and loved her child so completely that the imperfection felt like a daily emergency. The first DUI had happened 14 months before the story truly begins. A Friday evening, a work happy hour that stretched longer than intended, a decision that she had known was wrong the moment she turned the key in the ignition and had made anyway because her judgment was compromised and her grief was loud and she was, at that moment, simply not the person she wanted to be. Nobody was hurt. She was stopped 3 blocks from her apartment. She attended the mandated programs, paid the fines, served her community hours, and told herself, promised herself, Chloe's face burning in her mind like a lantern, that it would never happen again. The second time was 9 months later. A relapse that had been building for weeks, announced by the familiar signs she had learned to recognize and had chosen, in her exhaustion, to ignore. This time there was an accident. Minor, a scraped fender in a parking lot, no injuries, but with her prior record, the calculus was different. The mandatory sentence was 10 days. 10 days. She had stood in her kitchen after the sentencing and done the arithmetic of her life. No family nearby except Sarah. No close friends she trusted enough for this. No money for a professional service, not with the fines and the legal fees already bleeding her account. She had $1,200 left, emergency money she had kept folded in an envelope in her underwear drawer, the way her mother had taught her. Money for exactly this kind of emergency. She had called Sarah. Sarah Reeves Caldwell was 3 years older than Maya and had built a life that looked, from the outside, like the opposite of her sister's. Stable job in corporate logistics management, a clean apartment in a good neighborhood, a social life that was organized and intentional. Sarah had loved her mother as fiercely as Maya had grieved her just as deeply, and had processed that grief in the way that was native to her character, by becoming more structured, more controlled, more determined to hold the shape of her life together. She loved Maya the way older sisters love complicated younger sisters, with exasperation and ferocity and a loyalty that was deeper than her frequent frustration. She had watched Maya's last 3 years with the particular anguish of someone close enough to see everything clearly and too close to be listened to. When Maya called, Sarah answered. When Maya explained, her voice measured and careful, stripped of drama, just the plain architecture of the situation, Sarah did not hesitate. "Bring her to me," she said. "I've got her. Go do what you need to do." Maya drove Chloe to Sarah's apartment on a Sunday evening. She had packed Chloe's bag with the precision of a person trying to compress love into luggage. Favorite stuffed rabbit, the specific brand of apple juice Chloe preferred, the lavender lotion that Maya used at bedtime so Chloe would have the smell of her mother at night, printed photos of Maya that she'd taped inside a little notebook so Chloe could look at her face whenever she wanted. She handed Sarah the envelope with the $1,200 in cash. "This covers everything," Maya said. "Food, activities, anything she needs. There's more than enough." Sarah tried to wave it away. "Maya, I don't need." "Take it." Maya's voice was quiet but absolute. "Please. It's important to me. This isn't charity. This is me taking care of my daughter even when I can't be there. Take it." Sarah took it. They stood in the doorway of Sarah's apartment, Chloe already inside investigating Sarah's bookshelf with focused curiosity, and Maya looked at her sister with an expression that contained everything she couldn't put into words. 10 days, Maya said. "Just 10 days. Don't hand her to anyone else." She needs to be with family. She needs to know she's with family. She'll be with me, Sarah said. I promise. Maya nodded. She went inside and held Chloe for a long time. Then she left. She did not look back at the building as she drove away because she knew if she did, she would not be able to keep going. For 120 hours, a promise held. Then the world outside stopped asking permission to intrude. The first 5 days were, by every account, genuinely beautiful. Sarah had always had a gift with Chloe that surprised people who knew her as the structured, no-nonsense older sister. Around her niece, something in Sarah loosened. She got on the floor. She did voices for stuffed animals. She made the pancakes that Chloe had already identified as a primary life pleasure, thick ones with blueberries, served with the kind of ceremony that made a 4-year-old feel like an honored guest at a special occasion. Day 1, they went to the park. Chloe ran herself into happy exhaustion on the climbing structure while Sarah sat on a bench and felt something unexpectedly like peace. At bedtime, Chloe asked for her mother once, briefly, then accepted the stuffed rabbit and the printed photo and fell asleep with the quiet trust of a child who feels genuinely safe. Day 2, a craft day. Sarah had stopped at the store and bought construction paper, googly eyes, glue sticks, and pipe cleaners, and they spent 3 hours building increasingly abstract animals that Chloe named with great seriousness. The giraffe was Gerald. The lopsided purple thing was Professor Biscuit. Sarah photographed each one and sent the pictures to Maya's phone, knowing Maya couldn't respond from inside, but wanting the photos to be there waiting when she got out. Day 3, rain kept them inside. They built a blanket fort in the living room and watched movies and ate popcorn, and Chloe taught Sarah a clapping game she had learned from a child at her daycare, which required a level of coordination Sarah discovered she didn't possess, which made Chloe laugh so hard she got the hiccups. Day 4, Sarah took Chloe to a children's museum downtown. Watching her niece move through the exhibits, pressing buttons, peering into microscopes, standing with arms wide in the wind tunnel with her pigtails flying and her face stretched in pure joy, Sarah felt something tighten in her chest. Not unpleasantly. She thought about her sister. About how Maya had made this small, magnificent, joyful person in the middle of so much pain. She thought about how that was its own kind of heroism. Day 5 started like the others. Breakfast. Cartoons. Chloe reorganizing Sarah's spice rack by color, a project she had undertaken without being asked and that Sarah chose to find charming rather than concerning. Sarah's phone rang at 11:23 a.m. She looked at the screen. Her boss. Richard Holt, a man whose communication style was not so much managing as meteorological. You didn't have conversations with Richard Holt. You experienced him the way you experienced weather. She answered. What followed was a 15-minute phone call that Sarah would replay in fragments for months afterward. The company's primary logistics hub in Texas had experienced a catastrophic systems failure connected to a software migration that had gone wrong. The operations director on the ground was overwhelmed. The client, a major retail chain whose contract represented 22% of the company's annual revenue, was threatening to walk. Richard needed his best operations manager on a plane to Dallas by 6 p.m. That was Sarah. Richard, I have a family situation. Sarah. His voice was the specific temperature of someone who has already decided and is going through the motions of conversation out of courtesy. I need you to hear what I'm saying. This is not a request that has a no attached to it. If you are not on that flight, I cannot protect your position. And I want to be clear. I will not be able to recommend you anywhere else in this industry. I've built relationships for 30 years. You know what that means. Sarah knew what that meant. She sat on the edge of her bed after the call and stared at the carpet and listened to Chloe in the other room narrating something to Professor Biscuit in a serious, instructional tone. Her mind ran the calculations with the cold efficiency of someone whose professional life was built on logistics. Dallas. 5 days remaining on Maya's sentence. She could not take Chloe on a work emergency. The pace would be brutal, the hours unpredictable. She could not leave Chloe alone. She could not call Maya. She could not afford to lose this job. Her mortgage, her savings structure, her entire financial architecture depended on her income. She thought about who she could call. The honest answer was, Not many people. She was not close to many people in the way that created the kind of trust this situation required. She thought of neighbors, dismissed them. She thought of friends from work, dismissed them. And then she thought of Donna. Donna Hutchins was 47 years old, a former daycare worker who now provided private childcare from her home. Sarah had met her 8 months earlier through a mutual acquaintance, had been to her home once for a dinner party, had found her warm and organized and genuinely good with the children who had been present at that gathering. She had no formal arrangement with Donna, no established relationship of the depth this situation deserved. But she had her number in her phone, and Donna had mentioned more than once that she occasionally took short-term childcare arrangements. Sarah called Donna. Donna was available. Sarah packed Chloe's things, carefully, completely, transferring everything from Maya's original bag plus several new things Sarah had bought over the 5 days. She sat down with Chloe and explained, in the way you explain things to 4-year-olds, that Auntie Sarah had to go help someone far away, and that Chloe was going to stay with Miss Donna, who was very kind, and that it was only for a few days, and that Mommy would be coming to get her very, very soon. Chloe looked at her with those serious dark eyes. "Is Miss Donna nice?" she asked. "She's very nice," Sarah said. "Does she make pancakes?" "I bet she does." Chloe considered this with the gravity of a 4-year-old making a significant decision. "Okay," she said finally. Sarah drove Chloe to Donna's house. She gave Donna $400 of the $1,200 Maya had given her for the remaining 5 days. She spent 45 minutes briefing Donna, Chloe's routine, her food preferences, the rabbit that needed to be present at bedtime, the lavender lotion, the photos of Maya. She drove to the airport. On the plane to Dallas, she told herself she had done the responsible thing. She had ensured Chloe's safety. She had ensured continuity of care. She had handled an impossible situation with the tools available to her. She did not call Maya's phone to leave a message explaining what had happened. She told herself it was because Maya couldn't access her phone inside anyway, and there was nothing to be done, and she would explain everything when Maya got out. This was the decision, not the Texas trip, not the transfer of care, but this silence, this choosing not to leave a record, not to create a message that would be waiting, that would soften what was coming. This was the decision that would cost the most. She walked out expecting to find everything where she left it. She had forgotten that the world doesn't hold still while you're away. Maya Reeves walked out of the county facility at 8:17 a.m. on a Friday morning and stood on the pavement in the early autumn light and breathed. Just breathe. Then out. Slow and deliberate. The air outside tasted different from the air inside. Obvious, perhaps, but the obviousness didn't make it less true. She stood there for a full minute and just existed in the openness of it. No walls at precisely that distance. No schedule imposed from outside. No sounds that weren't hers to navigate. Then she turned her phone on. It loaded slowly, days of notifications cascading in, mostly irrelevant work emails, news alerts, a text from a coworker checking in. She scrolled through looking for anything from Sarah and found the photos Sarah had sent on days 1 through 4. Gerald the giraffe, Professor Biscuit, Chloe in the wind tunnel with her arms wide and her face incandescent with joy. Maya stood on the pavement looking at that photo of her daughter's face for a long moment. She looked the way Maya had always hoped she would look. Like someone who had never been handed a reason to stop trusting the world. Maya texted Sarah, "Out. On my way. Thank you for everything. I love you." She called a rideshare and sat in the back with her small bag on her lap and watched the city reappear around her, street by street, and thought about what she was going to do differently. She had been doing this thinking for 10 days, in the particular focused way that enforced stillness produces, turning her life over in her hands like an object she was examining for damage, for weak points, for where the repairs needed to begin. She had a list. A real one, written in a notepad she'd managed to get hold of inside. 32 items. Everything from therapy appointments to AA meetings to a savings plan to a letter she wanted to write to Chloe to be opened when Chloe was 18. Not a goodbye letter, the opposite of a goodbye letter. A letter that said, "I was broken and I chose you anyway. Choosing you is what unbroken me." The rideshare pulled up to Sarah's apartment building at 9:04 a.m. Maya climbed out, bag over her shoulder, and pressed Sarah's buzzer. No answer. She pressed it again. Waited. Pressed it a third time. She stepped back and looked up at the building with a frown forming. Called Sarah's phone. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail. Sarah, I'm outside. I'm here for Chloe. Call me. She waited 10 minutes on the pavement. Called again. Voicemail again. The frown had deepened into something else now, not quite alarm, not yet, but the early weather of it. The atmospheric pressure drop that precedes a storm. She texted, Sarah, where are you? I'm at your building. 3 minutes passed. Then Sarah's response arrived, and it was not what Maya had expected. Not because of what it said, the words were clear enough, the explanation laid out in the careful, structured way that was native to Sarah's communication style. The Texas emergency. The impossible ultimatum. Donna Hutchins. The address. She's safe, Maya. She has been perfectly looked after. I am so sorry I didn't find a way to tell you sooner. I made the best decision I could with what I had. Maya read it once. Read it again. Then she stood on the pavement outside her sister's apartment building and felt something move through her that she did not have a name for, something that was part rage and part grief and part a very specific, very old fear that she had carried since childhood, since a father who left, since a world that had taught her repeatedly that the people you trusted most reserved the right to make unilateral decisions about your life without consulting you. She typed the address Donna's into her maps. She did not respond to Sarah. The drive to Donna Hutchins' house took 11 minutes. Maya stood on the front step of a house she had never seen, in a neighborhood she had never been to, and rang the doorbell. The woman who answered was pleasant-faced and slightly startled. She had clearly not been expecting anyone. Maya introduced herself. Explained she was Chloe's mother. Watched Donna's face cycle through recognition and a slightly anxious adjustment. Oh, yes, of course. Come in. She's just having breakfast. Maya walked through a stranger's hallway, past a stranger's family photographs, into a stranger's kitchen. Chloe was sitting at a kitchen table she had never sat at before, in a booster seat that was not her own, eating cereal from a bowl decorated with cartoon characters she didn't recognize, in a house that smelled of someone else's life. She looked up when Maya walked in. For 1 second, just one, Chloe's face did the thing that 4-year-olds' faces do when they have been holding themselves together and the person they most needed suddenly appears. It crumpled just at the edges. Just enough. Mommy, she said. And Maya crossed that kitchen in 3 steps and gathered her daughter into her arms and held her so completely that they were briefly one shape instead of two, and Maya pressed her face into Chloe's hair and breathed and breathed and breathed. I've got you, she said into those brown pigtails. I'm here. Mommy's here. Donna stood in the doorway with an expression that understood it was time to become background. Maya held her daughter for a long time. Then she straightened. Collected Chloe's things, every item she could find, checking corners and under furniture with the systematic thoroughness of a woman recovering something precious from an unfamiliar place. She thanked Donna in a voice that was polite and absolutely flat. She put Chloe in her car seat with the focused care of someone doing a task that requires all available attention. She drove 3 blocks. Then she pulled over. And she sat there, both hands on the steering wheel, and let the thing that had been building since she read Sarah's text finally arrive. It wasn't crying. It was bigger than crying. It was the specific devastation of a person who had done the one thing they could control, had made the one careful, deliberate arrangement that was supposed to keep the most important things safe, and had discovered that even that had been taken out of her hands without her permission. She had asked for one thing. One promise. Don't hand her to anyone else. She needs to be with family. 10 days. She had asked for 10 days. She had gotten 5. Nothing that matters gets rebuilt quickly. Quick is for things you don't care about losing again. The weeks that followed were not easy. Maya did not pretend they were. She was not, by nature, a person who smoothed things over for the comfort of smoothness. She had grown up in a family that believed in naming things, in her mother's particular tradition of bringing problems into the light rather than managing them in the dark, and she carried that tradition even when it was inconvenient. She and Sarah did not speak for 9 days after the confrontation. 9 days in which Maya focused entirely on Chloe and on the work of reconstruction. She attended her first AA meeting 3 days after getting out, sat in the back row of a church basement that smelled of industrial coffee and old wood and listened to people tell the truth about themselves, and felt, for the first time in a long time, the specific relief of being in a room where pretending wasn't available as an option. She called the therapist whose number she had carried in her wallet for 6 months without dialing. She made an appointment. She went. She looked at the 32 items on her notepad list and started, methodically, from the top. Chloe, for her part, was remarkably intact. Children are more resilient than adults generally want to believe, and Chloe had the particular resilience of a child who was fundamentally secure in her mother's love, the kind of security that is not dependent on perfect circumstances but on the bone-deep knowledge that she was wanted and seen and precious to someone. Donna's house had been strange and Miss Donna had been nice enough and the pancakes had been, reportedly, acceptable but not at Sarah's level. She had also, somewhere in the 5 days at Donna's house, learned a new clapping game. She taught it to Maya on their 3rd night home, with great seriousness, and Maya learned it badly and Chloe corrected her with patient authority, and they practiced it until Maya got it right, and then they practiced it some more because getting it right had turned out to be insufficient for Chloe's standards. That night, after Chloe was asleep, Maya sat at her kitchen table with her notepad and her list and a cup of tea and thought about what had happened. Not with the raw devastation of those first days. With something more considered. She thought about her sister, about what it must have cost Sarah to make that choice, about how Sarah's particular fear was different from Maya's but no less real. Sarah's fear was about losing the structure she had built, the professional identity that had been her anchor through the same losses that had undone Maya. Different coping. Same grief. Same terror of dissolution. She thought about the $1,200 and what it had meant to her, not the amount, but the intention behind it. The need she had to be a mother even in her absence. To provide. To care. To ensure. And she thought about how Sarah had genuinely, with genuine love and genuine care, tried to honor that, and had then been placed in an impossible position and had made an imperfect choice. She did not absolve Sarah. She was not built for easy absolution. But she began quietly on day 9 to make room for complexity. She called Sarah on the evening of the 9th day. Sarah answered on the first ring. Neither of them spoke for a moment. "How's Chloe?" Sarah asked. "She has opinions about my clapping game technique," Maya said. Sarah laughed. It was a careful laugh, tentative, but real. "Maya, I'm sorry. For what I did and for not telling you. I know you are. I would go back and—" "I know." Maya paused. "I'm not ready to say it's okay. Because I don't know yet if it's okay. But I'm ready to say that I know you love her. And I know you love me. And I think we have to figure out how to work with what happened rather than around it." "Yes," Sarah said simply. "Whatever that takes." What it took was slow and nonlinear and required both of them to exercise muscles that were underdeveloped. It required Sarah to sit with having caused pain without immediately fixing it with reason. It required Maya to practice receiving care without bracing for its withdrawal. It required them both to talk about their mother, really talk, the way they hadn't let themselves in the 2 years since Eleanor died, because the grief had been too large and they had each been managing it alone in their separate ways. They talked about Eleanor in Sarah's kitchen 3 weeks after the confrontation, over actual pancakes that Sarah made while Chloe supervised, and the talking was hard and necessary, and by the end of it something had shifted between them, not back to what it was before, because that was not available, but forward into something that had the texture of truth rather than management. The money was a separate conversation. Sarah gave back the $800 without ceremony. Maya accepted it without ceremony. The money had never been entirely about money. She didn't become a different person. She became a more honest version of the one she already was. 6 months later, Maya Reeves sat in the parking lot of a community center on a Thursday evening and looked at her notepad. 28 of the 32 items had checkmarks beside them. She had been in therapy for 5 months. She had 93 days of sobriety, not her longest streak, but her most intentional one. She had started attending a support group specifically for mothers in recovery, and had discovered there the particular grace of being witnessed by people who understood not just the addiction but the specific terror of being an imperfect mother who loved her child with a ferocity that the addiction could not fully touch. She was not fixed. She was not finished. She did not use those words because her therapist had gently and repeatedly pointed out that they implied a destination rather than a practice, and Maya had come to understand that recovery was not a place you arrived at but a direction you kept choosing. Chloe was thriving. She had started pre-K and had made 2 best friends and had strong opinions about the school lunch menu and had, at some point, appointed herself the official supervisor of Maya's morning routine, which she managed with an authority that suggested a future in management. Sarah came for dinner on the last Sunday of every month. She had started seeing a therapist of her own, not because Maya had suggested it, but because the crisis had cracked something open in Sarah too, had brought her face to face with the limits of structure as a grief management strategy. She was learning, in her careful, thorough way, to be in feelings rather than around them. It was slow work. It was the right work. Maya looked at her notepad. Item 32, write Chloe's letter. She had been saving it. Not avoiding it, saving it. For when she had enough distance from the worst of it to write honestly. For when she could write about the pain without being inside it, could describe the bottom without being on the floor of it. She thought she might be ready now. She opened to a fresh page. Dear Chloe, she wrote, by the time you read this, you will be 18, and I will have spent 14 years hoping I got more things right than wrong. I want to tell you about the year I hit bottom, because I think you deserve to know it, not to worry you, and not to make you carry something that isn't yours to carry. But because you are part of the reason I climbed out. Because the thought of your face, that gap between your teeth, those serious dark eyes, was sometimes the only handhold I could find. You didn't save me. That's not a child's job, and I would never give you that weight. But you gave me the clearest possible reason to save myself. And that is different. That is a gift you gave me just by existing. I love you more than all the water in all the oceans. I always will. Even the oceans don't come close. She put the pen down. Outside the car, the evening was cooling, the sky doing something spectacular with the last of the light. She watched it for a while. Then she picked up her phone and called Sarah. Hey, Sarah answered. Hey. Maya paused. I wrote the letter. The beat. Yeah. How was it? Maya looked at the notepad in her lap. At 29 checkmarks out of 32. At the handwriting that had gotten steadier over the months, less urgent, more settled. Hard, she said. Good. Both at the same time. Most things worth doing, Sarah said. Yeah. Maya started the car. I'm coming home. She drove through the city as the streetlights came on, one by one, illuminating the familiar streets of a life she was choosing, deliberately and imperfectly and with her whole heart, to stay inside. If Maya's story hit you somewhere real, drop the words "Iggy" in the comments. And share this with someone who needs to hear it today. Hit subscribe for more stories that don't flinch from the truth.